Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really happy to be here in Western Australia. I had the opportunity to go on a road trip for 2 months in Western Australia. Went right from Kununurra, all the way around the coast, down to all the way to the Nullarbor Plain. Now I'd like to say I was chauffeur-driven, but in reality, I was actually a 10-year-old kid and my parents drove me in their four-wheel drive. But it was still a great experience. Back then, there were still unsealed roads on the National Highway. This is talking like back in the 80s. Of course, there were no screens in the car back then, so as a kid, I actually had to pay attention to what I was looking at outside the road, and no GPS in vehicles as well. So, yes, we did get lost. But back to now. Today I'm talking about a national view of regional and remote road safety. This was a project that was led by us at the Centre for Automotive Safety Research in South Australia, but we did it in collaboration with the Curtin Monash Accident Research Centre here in Western Australia. We had valuable assistance from the Austroads Working Group, which was led by the project manager, the lovely Melissa Parry, from the Road Safety Commission here, and we're also assisted by Joanna Robinson from TMR in Queensland and Brett Clifford from Northern Territory. And I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of the team, some who you might recognise from Western Australia here, Kate Bramweld, Peter Palomara and Matt Gavorko. So in this research, the idea or the objective was to understand the causes and contributing factors behind crashes in regional and remote areas in Australia and New Zealand, and to also identify evidence-based actions to reduce regional and remote trauma. This was done through 4 components. There was an international literature review. We also had an analysis of trends in crash data, a review of regional and remote road safety actions by jurisdictions since 2011, and also stakeholder consultation. And this involved interviews with around 40 road safety policy makers, practitioners and road safety experts from all Australian jurisdictions. This resulted in a series of recommendations, all to eliminate harm on our regional and remote roads. The project outputs was a research report and also an updated guide to road safety, part 5, for regional and remote areas that's ideal for practitioners. So how do we define remoteness? Well, within Australia, each state and territory use their own definition of what is urban and rural in relation to where a crash occurs. So to overcome this issue, we used an existing uniform indicator which is used by the ABS, and this defines remoteness areas into 5 classes across Australia. And this is based on measuring the access to services. And as you can see, the vast majority of Western Australia is classed as very remote. Now, if we look here at road fatalities by remoteness, around 1/3 of Australians live in regional and remote areas, but 2/3 of fatalities occur in these regions. And it's similar in Western Australia. On average, around 60% of fatalities are in regional areas. And what is really concerning is that in regional and remote areas, the fatality rate is around 5 times greater than for the rate for major cities. It's not all bad news. In the last decade, fatality rates in Australia have decreased, but the declines in regional remote areas have been much smaller than they have been in cities. I can see in the graph here that, thank you. We can see in the graph here that fatality rates clearly increase with remoteness, and it's a similar trend for injury rates as well. But let's think about the context of regional and remote areas for a moment. They pose a very challenging environment. There's low population densities, a vast network of roads of varying quality, significant socio-economic issues, a lack of alternative transport options, and geographical isolation in addition to limited resources, all of which impact on road safety. So what are some of the key issues for road safety? First of all, safer roads. We looked at trends in national Australian fatal crash data from 2008 to 2016. You can see the statistics for regional areas are in the light green, dark green is for remote areas, and the red line is for major cities. So 3/4 of all deaths in remote areas and half in regional areas are due to single vehicle crashes. And this trend has remained relatively stable over time. It's not a new issue. And as we heard earlier this morning, 71% in Western Australia. Also, head-on crashes have slowly increased over time in regional areas to about 28% of deaths in 2016. And in remote areas, they've also increased. I'm going to talk about these are more sort of high-level national strategic recommendations for safe roads. Regional and particularly remote areas are often lack infrastructure and support due to the wide dispersion of crashes within a large road network with low traffic volumes. There is a need for prioritising and increasing investment in regional and remote road infrastructure, making road safety a key component, not just an afterthought. Experimentation with low-cost treatments in areas with low populations can also improve road safety and demonstrate the benefits to the community. Things such as the audible line marking, wide centre lines, motorcycle rails on barriers, shoulder sealing, those sorts of things. And to achieve systemic change, treatment options should favour corridor treatments rather than the more traditional black spot approaches. Our local government associations manage around 80% of Australia's roads, where over 50% of casualty crashes occur. These figures are even higher in Western Australia. So LGAs have a significant role in road safety outcomes. They need support in terms of resources and capability building to more strategically manage local roads and develop network safety plans. I'm sure Walga will agree with that. We have an example here of successful low-cost improvements, which comes from the Bruce Highway upgrade in Queensland. Here they've got low-cost wide centre lines which are retrofitted to separate opposing traffic lanes, as you can see in the picture on the right for the before and after, and that's accompanied with the audible road lines and sealed shoulders. The safety outcome was over a 40% reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes after 3 years. And now on to safer people or safer road users. Firstly, alcohol. The proportion of deaths due to crashes involving drivers with an illegal BAC in remote and regional areas is generally higher than in cities. However, in recent times, the proportion has trended downward. Now, in terms of drugs, there's incomplete data at the national level on drug driving fatalities by region of crash. But from the info we have, the proportion in regional areas shows a consistent upward trend, which is the opposite of alcohol. And methamphetamines and cannabis are the main drugs that have been detected. Unlicensed drivers account for more deaths in remote areas than in regional areas or major cities. Unlicensed drivers are a well-known risk-taking group. We know that socially disadvantaged groups and Aboriginal people in remote locations can have considerable difficulty in obtaining licences. Also, unrestrained vehicle occupants are a problem in remote areas. In 2016, in remote areas, 35% of deaths were from crashes involving unrestrained occupants, compared to 16% in regional areas and 8% in major cities. There's a range of well-known risk factors for being unrestrained in crashes, including low socioeconomic status, drink driving, driving unlicensed, and Aboriginality. Fatigue has also been identified as a rural safety problem. For example, in Western Australia, killed and serious injury crashes in regional areas were 1.9 times more likely than those in metro areas to be fatigue-related. So now on to motorcyclists. And while the proportion of motorcyclist deaths in major cities has been relatively constant, the proportion in regional and remote areas has steadily increased. In fact, there's been a 49% increase in remote areas. Why is this so? Well, over the last decade, motorcycle riding has grown in popularity, which has subsequently resulted in increased exposure. There's also a higher burden of road trauma amongst Aboriginal people. You can see in the graph here, it's crash data from Western Australia that shows that the fatality rate for Aboriginal people is higher than it is for non-Aboriginal people. However, this gap has been decreasing over time. Melissa will talk about specific issues and projects concerning Aboriginal road safety next. So the recommendations for safer people. Solutions centring on road users and behaviour change are difficult to achieve, but there are some encouraging results through community-led collaborative approaches that involve partnerships with organisations such as health, education and justice. Commendable examples include programs to improve access to licensing in remote and Aboriginal communities. There's a program called On the Right Track Remote in South Australia, where they've had great results. Aboriginal licensing has increased from 17% to 41%. Benefits from these licensing programs include employment, better access to services, additional drivers in the community, and improved relationships between community and police. There's also some partnership programs fitting child restraints in remote Aboriginal communities that have achieved successful outcomes in terms of delivery, but also fostering positive relationships with the community. The Northern Territory Buckle Up Child Restraint Program for remote areas has installed over 1,500 seats to date and have trained 80 people to install the child restraints. Alternative transport options to driving one's own vehicle, such as the remote bus program in the Northern Territory, are often not available in regional and remote areas, but they should be trialled more often because they can provide really critical services for remote communities, enabling them access to health, employment, education and social opportunities. The Northern Territory Bus Program funding provides support for operational and capital costs for commercially operated services. Now, some people engage in risky behaviours in rural areas because they don't believe they will be caught by police. Enforcement in these areas is difficult because of the large road network and limited resources, so we need to investigate the most effective enforcement strategies for these areas to increase the perceived risk of detection. And now on to safer speeds. The association between higher vehicle speeds, increased crash rates and injury severity is well established, but it's not always well understood amongst the community. You can see in the graph here that the largest proportion of regional and remote casualty crashes occur in high speed zones of 100 k's and over. And in Western Australia, 47, that's nearly half of all people killed or seriously injured in regional areas, occur on roads with 110 km/h speed zones. The default speed limit on rural roads is 100 km/h in all Australian jurisdictions other than Western Australia and Northern Territory. Speed limits in regional and remote areas are high and often do not reflect the risks of travelling on lower quality roads or where there's inadequate infrastructure. Roads in rural areas are often narrow, they're unsealed with highly variable surfaces conditions. And the roadside also might have unsealed shoulders, there's trees, there's wildlife, livestock roaming around. So it's understandable that we would need people to drive vehicles at lower speeds when the roads don't have side barriers, they don't have large clear zones, and the surface conditions aren't great. As the road network is large, speed management is necessary in the absence of adequate infrastructure, but it can be difficult in rural areas. Automated point-to-point speed enforcement, vehicle-based speed management technologies such as ISA, and fleet management incentives offer potential solutions. Any gains in speed management are beneficial. I should also mention here too that in the stakeholder consultation, people expressed a desire for national leadership around the harmonisation of appropriate speed limits. And finally, onto safer vehicles. There's a higher incidence of older, less crash-worthy vehicles with fewer crash avoidance technologies. This graph here shows ANCAP data, and indicates that older model vehicles are overrepresented in fatalities. We currently don't have national data on the age of crash-involved vehicles by region, so it is difficult to qualify the exact extent to which vehicle factors contribute to regional road trauma. However, research does indicate that certain drivers in rural areas may be more likely to drive older vehicles. These people are more likely to be younger, middle to low socioeconomic status, and Aboriginal people. Vehicle safety arguably holds the most promise for regional and remote areas. Newer, safer vehicles can provide a high level of occupant protection and access to technologies that can mitigate common crash types. Policies and incentives to accelerate proven safety and driver assist technologies into the driving fleet are needed, and with those involving government fleet purchasing are quite promising. Also, Australian design rules also offer a means to mandate new technology such as AEB and ESC, particularly in vehicles popular in rural areas such as utilities and heavy vehicles. This is a longer term solution given the average age of the vehicle fleet is around 10 years, but can be worthwhile. So today we've discussed the key issues and high-level strategic recommendations. In both the research report and the guide, there's sections dealing with specific countermeasures for each of the key issues, and they're rated according to the strength of the evidence base, which is summarised in this large table here. But I do encourage you to have a look at these documents for more details, because I only have 15 minutes today, so I've tried to cover a 100-page report in that time. So I encourage you to look at these reports, and you can access them online on the Austroads website. And please use this opportunity as a tool to start. You've got the research here for what to do in regional remote areas. Use this as a tool to start doing something and take action. And thank you very much.